Well, I would like to present you the concept and the implementation of the kidney registry, the ERKReg registry for rare kidney diseases. So in that registry, the concept is that we would have a very lean core registry collecting only limited information, the common data elements, and some information which is central to kidney disease. And then we would also collect a couple of pieces of information that would inform key performance indicators, performance and outcome indicators, so we know in a disease-specific manner how the centers are doing with the management of certain individual diseases. And we have defined in a Delphi process more than 50 of these key performance indicators. We'll come back to that. And the registry is built in a kind of modular fashion, so we can add sub-registries to the main registry. So if a certain diagnosis is chosen, and there is a sub-registry module, you can click on that sub-registry, and additional questions regarding this particular disease will open up only for this patient. And we have done sub-registries for renal tubular acidosis, cystinuria, and pediatric lupus nephritis. So from these more detailed registries, we are expecting genotype, phenotype information, natural history information, and best medical practice information, whereas the core registry is more informative about the disease demographics, and it can also provide information where there are patients that are potentially suitable for clinical trials. So this is the dashboard as it currently is designed for our registry. So you can, this is
I'm sorry, Franz, if I had a problem with my screen, but I think that you're not sharing your screen.
Oh.
We cannot see your presentation.
I can see the presentation.
You can see it?
I
Okay,
can
so
see it too.
Okay, perfect. So it's me. Okay, it's only me. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So this is the dashboard where each center sees their own patients only. And so you have this really limited information where you can orientate yourself, and you can also see whether when the next visit is due. We are collecting data once a year. When a visit is overdue, or when some items like the genetic results are still pending, or when a diagnosis has not yet been established, then you can only enter a suspected diagnosis, and then you would still have to confirm it. And when you click on one of these rows with a patient, then these additional fields pop up where you can access the basic data, add a new visit, or terminate a patient in cause of loss of follow-up or death. And of course, you can also go back to the previous visit entries. We thought this is quite a user-friendly design, also because we are collecting data from all the patients in our registry. It's good to have the option to filter this dashboard according to certain features. So if you only want to see those patients where a new entry is due, you can just filter this here. Or if you're only interested in patients, let's say after kidney transplantation, you can check here as well. And of course, you can also sort the patients according to these rows. So before we implemented the registry, we started to negotiate data sharing agreements with the individual sites. So this process is actually, even after 2 years, not completely finished, but we hope to have soon data sharing agreements with all sites. And in these data sharing agreements, the responsibilities of the local sites and of the central coordination office are clearly described in accordance with the GDPR principles. We have a registry board for the governance, which is composed of several representatives of the expert work groups. We have 2 members from the adult and pediatric nephrology professional society in Europe. We have one representative for the sub-registries and a patient representative on this board. And the board actually supervises the conduct of the registry. It defines the contents for the annual reports that we'll come back to. And it also, by now, it is carrying out the function of a data access committee. We will probably outsource the data access committee into a separate committee later on this year. We are also serving as primary contact for interactions with potential sponsors. So this is the patient enrollment over the past 2 years. We have started enrolling in January 2019, and you can see this is a very nice steady enrollment. And of course, part of this growth is due to, let's say, acquisition. This is the number of centers that contributed to the registry. So they gradually increased because not all centers were ready at the same time. That took the individual centers different amounts of time to get started. So we started with about 17, and we are now at 48 centers participating in the registry and contributing data. You will also see a few upward sprints, let's say, and these are actually related to our annual meetings and the meetings we organize for the registry users. So when it comes to the time where we want to review the status of the registry, people get very industrious and enter a lot of patients. So every time we have these meetings, we accelerate the patient enrollment a little bit. But more than 8,000 patients within 2 years is, I think, quite a nice result so far. We have opened the registry. Maybe I can go back to this slide. Not only to the ERKNet members and the affiliated partners, but also to other interested centers outside the ERN community. And indeed, there is a kind of interest of external centers. So 38% of the centers that have signed up to the registry are actually not from ERKNet or affiliated partners. But these centers only very sporadically enter patients. So they are 38% of the centers, but only 3% of the patients come from these external centers, and 92% of the patients in the registry are actually from the member centers. You can see here the distribution of active sites in Europe, and this is the sizes of the circles represent the numbers of patients enrolled to date. You can see we have very small but also very large sites, like Paris-Necker has contributed almost 1,500 patients now. We also are now starting to be able to calculate the percentage or the fraction of rare kidney disease patients on a per million population basis in each country. And so we see that while most patients in absolute terms come from Italy and France and Germany, the actual coverage related to the population density is highest in 2 G13 countries, in Slovenia and in Lithuania, where 3 centers are very active and are covering a large part of the actual rare kidney disease population. So as the registry grows, we'll be doing more of this epidemiological work on the registry. This is, we also know how many patients are in the individual centers from their applications from 2016 and then from the monitoring data they provided later on. So we have a rough idea of how many rare kidney disease patients are treated in our member centers. And we can calculate the fraction of patients, of these patients, they have already enrolled in the registry. And this is what you see here. So the average number is 28% of the patients that were reported to be treated in these centers are now part of the registry. And there's one center, again, Paris, which has already exceeded 100% because they have also enrolled new patients that came in 2020 for the first time. So they have even exceeded the total number of patients that they originally provided to the ERN application process. So 28% of all active centers, but not all centers are active. So if we relate the number to all centers, it's 18%. So there's still a lot of room for growth of this registry. So let's come to the actual implementation details. How did we get there? How did we achieve to have 8,000 patients enrolled in 48 centers? Well, it starts with having a procedure in place to explain the registry and invite the patients who come to the clinic for the first time to enroll in this registry. And this, as you can see here from a survey we did just 2 weeks ago, is usually done, as you would expect, by the doctor in charge, and in some cases by research coordinators or documentation assistants. But the key to success, let me put it this way, is really that the research coordinators regularly remind the physicians in charge to include the patients. So there are people in charge of reminding the primary doctors, the doctors in the outpatient clinic, to mention the ERKNet registry to these patients. And usually, or many times, they even leave a note in the electronic patient file for the doctor to notify him that this patient has not yet been asked to get enrolled in ERKReg. So that's what we have implemented in most sites. Also, we provide these flyers that we designed for ERKNet and also for ERKReg features in a total of 8 languages to the patients. And so we just, in our survey, learned that more than 80% of the active sites are actually using these leaflets to pre-inform the patients on the ERN and the registry. Once the patient has agreed to be part of the registry, it comes to data collection. So we recently reviewed the editors that we know from their entries in the registry database. So we know that 111 local database editors are active in the 48 sites. And usually it's a single editor who is in charge of entering the data into the database. But there are also a number of centers with several editors where several people are entering data. Who are these people? Well, according to our records, 50% are senior physicians, 30% are junior physicians, and 20% are clinical research nurses and associates. However, if you look at the number of patients enrolled by these groups, the senior physicians have enrolled just 1/4 of the patients, and so have the junior physicians, and 50% of the patients are actually enrolled or entered by the clinical research associates. So I think this group is really very important, and I'm actually not even very sure that whether in some centers the senior physician has just given his user ID and password to a research nurse and she is acting on his behalf or her behalf. So maybe here there are more research nurses and coordinators hidden. I also looked up when the data is actually entered relative to the visit of the patient. And interestingly, 8% of the visits are actually entered on the day of the visit, so on the same day. And 31%, about 1/3 of the data, is entered within 1 week of the visit, and 50% within 3 weeks. And but again, there are some centers where we have very delayed entries, and only 80% of the entries have been completed or 3 months after the visit. So that is about the temporal structure of the data entries. But what is the source of the data? Well, you can see here from the responses to a recent survey that we did, about 2/3 of the data comes from electronic health records. But we have a number of sites that still are completely paper-based. So they have to extract the data from the paper files. And these are some centers in Italy, but also in Germany and Austria and so on. So the current state of, let's say, digitalization of the ERN centers is quite heterogeneous. And we also asked how long does it take you to make an entry? And for the basic data entry, which is a bit more laborious, you have to look up several diagnostic features, the genetic data, etc. It takes about 16 minutes when you use only paper records or mixed paper and electronic records. Those centers that have complete electronic health records, it takes them on average 12 minutes. So you can see that it's about 1/3 less time effort if you have all your data in an electronic file system. And this is for the follow-up visits. You could also think maybe some groups of some professions are more efficient or less efficient in entering data into the computer. And indeed, the senior physicians take 16 minutes to do a basic entry, and the junior physicians are much more efficient. It takes them only 12 minutes. And the clinical research associates that are sometimes not experts on clinical issues, but are certainly experts with the computer, they are in between. So from these data, I did some model calculations because we were discussing a lot about the cost for the local sites to do these data entries for a registry of an ERN. So if we assume that a site wants to enroll 500 patients, given these numbers, this would amount to 200 hours or 1.2 person months, to enroll the 500 patients. So it's about 10% of a position that has to be sponsored. In subsequent years, when there's less basic entries and more follow-up entries, I calculated that this amount is reduced by about 50%. And you can look at the cost also from the central point of view, from the coordination point of view. If you were to sponsor all the cost to enroll 5,000 patients in a year, it would be just one person year equivalent to fund. I thought these numbers might be of help in your plannings. However, I should say that most ERKReg sites are not claiming any costs, but they are doing this from their local resources. However, we also have negotiated individual working contracts with local staff from the central office when this was requested. So we have actually hired in quite a few centers research nurses, on private contracts, and the funds they get is really equivalent to the numbers we have up here. And this is on a per patient basis that they are paid for. Another important issue that you should think of when you implement your registries is to provide as much user support as possible. So we have this useful documents file here in our website. where we have information on the registry, the manual, the catalog of the renal diagnosis, the offer codes, of course, a link to the patient-informed consent forms, and a document with frequently asked questions. And this seems to be accepted quite well in the community. Also, we have what we call our Registry User Day once a year, which was started last week. And there people can ask questions, and we inform them about any new amendments to the registry, any changes in the data dictionary, etc. But with every registry, there will be certain questions which are a little bit tricky or maybe not very intuitive to understand what should be done. So for these questions, we have this FAQ document where we explain exactly what should be done to answer the question. Regarding data quality management, we have quite an excellent programmer for our registry. So he implemented plausibility checks upon data entry. So when an erroneous entry is made, for instance, here, height and weight are mixed up. So the patient is supposed to be 90 centimeters in height and 178 kilograms in weight. Then a warning is elicited as soon as you click the Save button that this height is very unusual and the height should be checked, and so the same for the weight. But if you confirm this unusual value, you can still save it. There are other data which cannot be saved. For instance, when a biologically implausible biochemical value is entered, or a logical error has occurred. For instance, if the systolic blood pressure is lower than the diastolic blood pressure, this is a clear error, and the data set cannot be saved. And by these checks, we think that we have improved the data quality quite tremendously already at the time of data entry. And on top of that, we have implemented a second level of quality management, and this is an offline database check for plausible errors. I mean, errors which are minor in size, so it could still be a plausible value, and complex logical errors when we relate different data fields that cannot match. Then the system gives us an error message. And so we collect these potential errors in tables, which we send as queries to the investigators, and then they correct errors online, or they confirm the correctness of the entries. So by this two-layer system, we think we have quite a high data quality now in the registry. And then I would like to come back to the key performance indicator monitoring. So we are actually asking for certain data that allow us to judge on the performance of the patient management. And we spent a great deal of time on thinking what could be useful indicators that can be modified by the investigators, by the centers. And so we came up with a number of items for these different underlying kidney disease groups. And these are the general items, like the number of hereditary disease patients who have undergone a genetic screening. And then you can see for your own patient, for your own center, 78% of your hereditary disease patients have had screening. And so you are better than the other pediatric centers where it's 58.6. But all the pediatric centers are better than the adult centers where it's done only in 30% of patients. So in this way, you can really get an impression on where you stand, how you are practicing your treatment, your diagnosis and treatment of your patients, and how this compares to other centers in the network. And this has actually, so this is actually available online to the users. So as soon as you saved your last entry, you will have find here an updated statistics. So that's continuously accessible. But on top of that, but because not every senior investigator looks at these numbers every day, we thought we should also send this out twice a year as a center report. So every 6 months, our registry users get this key performance indicator monitoring report for their center, including the benchmarking. And this has been welcomed, or is increasingly welcomed, by the users. Another feature that we have implemented for the users is a kind of internal query tool for the registry. We call it the Cohort Finder. So here you can search according to the diagnosis tree for a certain diagnosis. You can click on the diagnosis. You can also filter by age or current treatment modality or chronic kidney disease stage. And then for this population of interest, you will see how many patients in total and in your center are entered in the registry, and in how many different ERKReg centers these patients are treated. So this gives you a very rough and first idea if you would like to start a clinical investigation on a certain subgroup of rare diseases. You can do that by the diagnosis, but you can also look at affected genes. So if you are interested in a certain mutation or a certain gene abnormality, then you can do the same queries. Of course, this is an academically led registry, so we also want to publish our findings. For that, we have developed an authorship policy, and the authorship attributions to the individual sites are commensurate with their enrollment activity. That's the first criterion we apply. So looking at your local population and the percentage of your local population you have entered in the registry and the absolute number of patients, you are entitled to a certain number of publications out of the consecutive series of publications. And of course, these numbers are intermittently adapted as the registry is growing. And in this way, we think we have a more or less fair way of assigning and including authors from the participating sites. So in summary, the key issues to consider when implementing an ERN registry from my point of view is you should aim for lean data collection. So keep your data dictionary short, because if you have a huge catalog of data fields that the users are supposed to enter to fill, then they probably will soon be demotivated. And I think the leanness of the data collection and perhaps this modular approach with having a very small core database with added disease-specific databases may be a good compromise. Have a user-friendly design in your registry, and now all of you who are currently working on the design of your registries, please test it widely and intensely, because it will pay back to have a user-friendly design. Also, we felt it was quite helpful that we have an integrative website where all information regarding the registry can be found in a single place. So whatever you want to look up, if it's an informed consent form to print out, or if it's the authorship policy, whatever you are interested in, you will always find it in the same spot. And this is also quite welcome by the users. And then a very important key to success is to have an operating procedure in place locally at the site level for contacting patients, not missing any patients that come to the outpatient clinic or are hospitalized. And this should really involve the entire team, because sometimes the investigators linked to the ERN in a center is one, let's say, consultant, but the others do not feel so intimately involved in the ERN, and that must be overcome. So it really should be a team effort. And so by now, I think this is working increasingly well in our registry, but it has taken quite some time. Also, there should be an operating procedure in place how the data entries are handled. So who is entering the data when? We talked about the user support, which is very important. Proactive data quality management. There should be frequent communications with the users, and we do surveys, maybe 2-3 surveys a year, and we have this annual meeting with the users, plus the meeting at the annual ERN meeting. So we talk with them quite a lot, and that also helps to find out where tricky points are, and then we can work on these and remove any obstacles to data entry. And then finally, and perhaps really still most importantly, there must be a real benefit for the user of the registry. So we are producing annual reports of the registry. We have this KPI statistics function, the query function. We accept study proposals. We didn't talk about the data access procedure. And we provide authorships to all the active sites.